Welcome back to Two Nobodies, everyone. Happy New Year. It's been some time since Kyle and I have gotten together to do a little Two Nobodies talk, but we're excited to be back. Kyle, we made it to season 2 or year 2. We did 31 episodes in our first
That's
year.
what it was?
31 episodes.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, I was there for about 12 of them, but yeah, that's pretty impressive. We had said when we started, we'll see. First, I think we said 10, and then we're like, yeah, let's do 30. So we did 30.
Yeah, we get it. I mean, that was kudos to you, though, because I remember I was like kind of projecting and trying to think, okay, what that number would be. And you're like, well, you kind of just have to do 10 and then kind of snowball a little bit. And then you setting it at like 30 was very motivating for me. So otherwise I probably would have like lost my motivation a little bit, because it's just like, yeah, I don't know. It takes some time, obviously, to get going, right? So.
Oh, yeah, like time to get going. And when I don't know about you, but after the first couple, I would like go back and listen to myself and just think, I sound like an idiot. I can't talk. I say like all the time. I say all the time. And I'm not good at articulating points clearly. There's so many times where I had a clear message in my head that I wanted to say, but on the show, it would take me 3 times as long to get there as it should have. And by the end of it, I was confused as to what I was trying to say. It's a real learning process to figure out. So, to watch yourself on TV, or on YouTube, I guess, because it's 2022. Nobody watches TV anymore. But to watch yourself on video and to hear yourself, like watching yourself is, I always do this. Like my eyes always go up and around, and like when I'm thinking, I'm doing weird things with my face. So you watch that and you look at it, and you're like, am I weird? Like, is that weird mannerisms? Are those weird mannerisms? But then you listen to yourself, and I sound like an idiot. I thought, especially the first like 5 or 10 episodes. Even now, I catch myself stuttering all the time, and anyway, so it's humbling to start, and then you see the result and you're not really pumped about it. So it takes a bit of effort to kind of get going. One of the things, though, that's really, I feel like, kept the momentum going is all the wonderful guests that you've recruited. Just really genuinely interesting people that are passionate about whatever they're talking about. It's super fun to talk to and to learn from. And our first guest was Tim Grant.
Mm-hmm.
Super interesting guy, like decorated career. And he just came on the show because he's a nice guy.
Absolutely.
Just, I don't know.
No, I agree.
All you.
We're very blessed to have the guests that we did, and they're fascinating conversations. I was actually going to ask you what stood out from those conversations, whether it be like content or just the conversations themselves. But I was going to say that, like, loved hearing about, the work that these people are doing. But the thing I loved the most was just like getting people into a place where it was like different for them. Right, there were some guests where just they hadn't been asked certain questions, right, and you're getting them into a place of some vulnerability, and then you start to see them opening up a little bit more, right? Like that connection was really cool to me. That's what I actually really enjoyed the most, because I mean the content's fascinating. Like, Emma Allen Verco and the microbes. Like, we could have talked for 2 hours on that one. Lenore Newman, right, with cell agriculture.
She might have been she was so funny.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know. I really enjoyed our conversation with both of them. They were amazing. And then Joelle Prévost, the author.
Mm-hmm. I got her book. I got her book, by the way. She.
She did?
She sent us 2 signed copies. So
we're
gonna have to do a little post on Instagram for her. But yeah.
That's super nice. Anyway, she was really interesting, and they're all very down to earth. And I always I think about what these people are going through, and because they're experts in their field, most of these people we learn about through newspaper articles or other forms of media, whether it's on YouTube or whatever. And so it's not new. Talking to people about what they know is not new. And I imagine sometimes that can get kind of tiring. And so whenever we go into a conversation or an interview, I always try to think about what's something, for people that are so tired of having these conversations and being asked the same questions over and over again, how can we make this interesting for them? And a lot of times there's just been a bit of a connection And I would ask the guests that as opposed to my assumptions. But I always feel like there's a bit of a connection there, and we just kind of connect, and we try to have fun. Always try to make them laugh a little bit and allow them to kind of crack a joke here and there, and ask sort of not ordinary questions like that. You always ask that 5 for dinner question, and I think, I don't know, I've heard 4 or 5 people after the interview was over say that's a really interesting question, or even in the interview, that's a really interesting question. So just angles or questions that they aren't used to answering, and I think that sort of helps. I mean, we have a lot of room to improve, but I'd say that's sort of a strength.
Yeah, I think we could have gone down the road, and not to say we don't want to ask like the sexy questions that create sound bites. Like sometimes you just have to ask some of these things. But I've heard a number of guests after our conversations where they just appreciated, like, we didn't necessarily ask things that were just going to create just really nice sound bites from their interview, right? Like they just felt like it was a good, deep conversation. And so I think hopefully the authenticity, we continue that and people grab onto that, because I think it's something that people seem to be enjoying.
Yeah, this is starting to feel like a Two Nobodies advertisement. So what do we suck at? Like, what's the stuff that we got to improve at? Or that, I don't know. I don't know that we can do any more book reviews or anything, because the few times that I've tried to talk about a book, I take notes beforehand, and because I want to sort of stay on cue, because I wander. I'm not always staying on point. And a couple of those episodes are just unbearable to me. Like the Coddling of the American Mind, which is the only time. This is the only time I'm going to mention this book this year.
Are you sure?
I feel like every other episode I bring it up,
right.
I have to stop talking about that book. But it was just me reading notes, and it was obvious that it was just me reading notes, and it wasn't. I hated that, and so I need to get better at either synthesizing the information well enough so I can just have a free-flowing conversation about it that's not scripted, or just stop doing that, because that's something that I loved the content that we were talking about, but I didn't portray it in a way that's really that interesting. So what do you got to work on? Because we're all just here talking about how great.
No, I think it's just holding that pause. We've talked about the whole silence thing and just letting that happen. Sometimes I feel like, especially if I'm like, Kyle and I, we take kind of, depending on who the guest is, we might take turns at kind of leading an episode. But especially those ones where I'm leading, I feel like this urge to fill in that space, and I think we just have to hold that a little bit more. So that's definitely, I want to work on that. And then the other thing is, it is tough to, when you're having a conversation and you have a question queued up and you're wanting to pay attention to what that person is saying so that you can build off that conversation, but you might have some really good questions that you have in the queue, and so it's like figuring out when to place those questions. And that's definitely an area that I want to work in, because I get stressed. Like I'm like super, by the end of these episodes, my jaw is so tight, and like my masseter muscles here are just tense, right? And so I just want to just listen to these people and have good conversations and not put so much pressure on, like, okay, I have this set of questions, right, that I need to ask, because actually that's when it feels forced, and that's when it feels like more of an interview, which I know generally some of these things are, but I like the ones where they're a lot more free flowing. Yeah,
I find it's really hard to actively listen, to have 100% of my attention on somebody who's saying something interesting, and think about what I'm going to say next. So to your point, like, I have these questions queued up. I want to listen to what you're saying, because that is sort of how we can have natural sounding conversations. But I also have some questions I want to get through in case their point ends and there isn't a clear question, off of what they just said. So you want to have something queued up, but you want to be paying attention, but you can't always do that. And you've done a lot of interviews by yourself. When it's both of us, we can sort of rely on somebody else to maybe have the next question in mind, or to sort of help with that momentum. But if it's just you're everything. Like, you are the one leading the interview. You are the one trying to make it, comfortable for the guest, but also natural sounding conversation, but also get to the points that you want to touch on. It's hard. I mean, I feel for you. So anyways, hopefully we have more episodes with both of us in them this year.
Absolutely.
That'd be sweet.
Yeah.
We got a website coming, I think.
I'm excited.
I was working on it before the new year. I mean, I think it looks good, but I've never done any kind of web design, so it probably looks terrible.
It looks good, guys.
But
It really does. I hope people like it.
it was me. So don't, if you like look at it and you think this is really bad, that's totally fair, and you're probably right. But to me, I'm like, microphone picture right here. This looks good. Probably going to win an award. So anyways, that should be coming soon-ish, and then we've got some, you've been booking meetings, and I keep telling you that I'm going to try to invite people on, and I got a couple that I'm really excited about. That hopefully say yes. So yeah, hopefully here's to another year of podcasting and having interesting conversations with interesting people.
Let's just see what's possible, man. I'm having a lot of fun. And I guess the other thing is that, just appreciated that you and I have been able to connect. Like before this whole thing, we were friends, but I would say we've had some really good conversations with each other, like on and off our recordings. And so just appreciate you as a friend and looking forward to building our friendship even closer this year.
Yeah, this is almost like a social thing because when we're really cooking, we're touching base, like we're messaging every other day, and we're actually conversing at least once a week, and I really appreciate that. Yeah, we've definitely grown as buds, and I think that's really, really nice. So I'm quite grateful for that, and hopefully that continues too. Maybe there'll just be like a massive rift between us, and we'll have like competing podcasts, and we'll just end up in like a podcast war or something. Well, who knows, right? I mean, this could turn into Avengers Endgame podcast version or something, which I actually didn't see those movies, but I imagine there's a war there somewhere, so yeah, maybe that's us. How was your break? How was your Christmas?
It was low key. It was just the three of us. We typically in the past would go to Ontario, visit family, but decided not to do that this year. Just stay here. It was Avina, my daughter, she just in a gift coma. Right, like just got so many gifts, and I don't know. I don't know about you, but we debate this. We've debated this the last couple of years. We're cognizant of not giving her too much, obviously, but at the same time, it's something about just this pandemic and her not being able to go out and stuff like that. It just for both of us, we have a soft spot of wanting to, and this is not the right way of probably doing it, but filling that maybe void with like just things for her, right? And this is the only time really of the year that we would do that. And so yeah, anyways, I don't feel bad about it, but it just makes me pause a little bit about whether that was the right approach or what does that mean. But she went through all
particularly now because it's been so cold where we live. It's not, you can't take your kid out. If you can take him out at all, you can't take him out for more than 15, 20 minutes. So that limits all these outdoor activities. Lots of days we just didn't take him out because it was minus 40 with a wind chill or something. And so you get frostbite in no time.
Yeah.
So I get that too. And particularly around this time of year, you feel kind of caged in or something. And there's only so many toys you can play with so many ways before you need, a bit of injection of the new. So I get that, buddy.
Yeah. No, well, that's true. We try to watch movies every now and then. When I watched, did you watch Don't Look Up?
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
Great, loved it.
It was hilarious. The irony they had into it. Obviously, there was a play on like Trump and his son with the president and the chief of staff, but just this extreme example of like how there's still polarization, and then they find out, that they've been duped, and it's just too late. And
and I mean,
like that was probably a spoiler, guys, for anyone who hasn't necessarily seen.
Or have they been duped?
Yeah,
it depends on what you think duped is. Or who knows? See, now they don't know. See, I just saved your butt. I thought it was really good. A little on the nose. Like there's no finesse to those metaphors. It's just a kick in the ass. And like rightfully so, whatever. And Adam McKay's done some good stuff. He did Vice, and he was the one that did The Big Short.
Oh, okay. That's why I could see some similarities in the way it was. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So like he always has a bit of a political slant, and he's telling a story that. And I think he tells them well. And even he started on, well, I'm not sure if he started, but he was on Saturday Night Live for a while as a writer, I think, or a content creator. And so you can see sort of his older SNL skits or digital shorts or whatever it was that sort of lead into how this movie comes along, I think. I thought it was great. I heard it wasn't getting great reviews, but I don't understand how. Because it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. And it was well done, I thought. And yeah, it's a little on the nose, and there's some funny things in it, but if you squint hard enough, you could see that playing out exactly that way. and the only difference is it's like this tangible meteor that's like coming towards Earth versus whatever other social issue you want to throw in there. I mean, he was probably driving at climate change, I guess, but there's 1,000 other things that you could replace for meteor, and you'd believe it until people actually physically see whatever the thing is. They're just not going to believe it, and I think it talks to it's tough right now to know where to get information that's reliable and where to, like. I think for people maybe like I have a bachelor of science degree, and so I understand. And sorry that that it's as part of the curriculum of that degree. You are heavily dosed with peer reviewed science, and so I sort of understand the value of that because it's been beat into my head in every first year science course I took and every research course I took and all that stuff. But if you never if you found that you didn't want to go to school and it wasn't beat into you, you might not understand the value of peer-reviewed science, and why would you? Like it's not something that they teach in schools, and they probably should. But so there's different levels of understanding of what it is. There's different levels of understanding of how it works, and if we're all just getting our information from headlines, which a lot of people are, including myself, it's tough to sort of understand what's real and what's not, and what you can rely on and what you can't, and who's funding things and who's not, and how that impacts maybe what your opinion should be on the reliability of data. And it's also not because, it's not always easy to access published scientific peer-reviewed journals.
Or understand them for that matter, like the translations.
Totally. So totally. So like you don't know where they are. Some you have to have a subscription to actually access them. So you got to pay money. And two, these are experts in whatever the field is, and they're dealing with like some, very specific part of a huge, likely scientific complex system. And so they use very specific technical words because that's the language of their sphere. But I don't know any of that shit because I am not a whatever climate scientist. Or I'm not like, if you're studying the eyes of some crab, you're not going to say, here's a species, here's the eye, here's what it you would expect that if you're writing some PhD thesis on the eyes of crabs, that the people reading it would have a pretty thorough understanding of whatever that is. And so you don't go through that sort of 30,000 level down to the minutiae. You just kind of jump right in because that's how it works. So that's a long-winded way of saying, even if you are able to get these reports, they're not always easy to kind of understand. And so then what? Like, then who do you rely on? I mean, you could find a bias in just about every single, like if it's Fox News, if it's CNN, whatever. Like you could, like almost every media publication has a bit of a leaning politically, and I don't know. It's a really hard time to figure out where do you get information, how do you trust it, how do you know to trust it, and to understand the scientific peer-reviewed process if you've never been exposed to it.
And in knowing all these things, the fact that we can't have honest conversations about, some of the things that are really mainstream, obviously, vaccinations, right? We know the science is clear and what it does, the efficacy of it. But if it's still a fairly new vaccine, so I can understand why people are a little hesitant. And so if they have questions and want to have an honest conversation, I feel like that space is so small that you just get ripped apart by even asking such questions. And people might have a pure intent about their questions. It's not that they're trying to like prove you wrong or anything like that. They're just genuinely curious and they want to know if this thing is actually safe for the kids or for themselves. And we should be able to hold those conversations, especially with all the things that you just said. And it seems like we are not able to do so. Like it really frustrates me.
And especially in a space now where, like I'm vaccinated, I'm getting my booster soon. Like, I will get my children vaccinated, all that stuff when it comes. But it's a new space, and there are going to be, like, never in history has a vaccine been rolled out this quickly and like this broadly. And it's amazing. It's a miracle of technology that's happening. It's, if you're not vaccinated, you should probably get vaccinated. Over 95% of cases, at least where we live, of people that are in the ICU are unvaccinated. Like it's very likely a good thing for people to do. And, I would encourage you to get vaccinated if your doctor agrees with me, right? Like, but there are going to be some times where people have questions on these vaccinations, and the answer is just we don't know yet. But I feel like that there isn't really a space for that. And even in those that like controversial sphere that like you just talked about when we're having these conversations, like, you know, whatever, like, there's so much passion that comes to that conversation that it's almost anger, or like it's just people feel like you're challenging their entire ideologies or their way of life by challenging sort of a perspective on whatever the topic may be. And that can, like, that's the same thing with climate change. That's the same thing with all these things. Like, and you know, like bring up any top of mind social issue, and because of sort of the polarization of political ideologies, you know, if you're not left, then you're right, and if you're not right, then you're left. And there's really no, I feel like sometimes like there's no space to be in the middle there, and to have conversations, like long conversations between the two, where you sort of hash out those things. And if the answer is I don't know, we should just be able to say I don't know. Like, this is like, we don't know what the long term trends are. We don't know any of that stuff. We don't know what COVID does to you 20 years after you get COVID. And we should be able to say that stuff. We do know what happens 2 years after you get COVID, and like, here's what it is. And we do know, you know, here's what the vaccines do, and here's why they protect you in a lot of ways. And, you know, I mean, even like, I don't know, like, you go on this for, I feel like we could have a whole series of episodes on this conversation around, you know, scientific data and like the reliability of data, and you know, sort of the ability to have good faith conversations in these spaces. And then you throw cancel culture in, and you throw, you know, and, you know, I'm not saying that people who, you know, if you're a misogynist who has abused women your whole career, yeah, like, you should lose your career. You should be in jail, right? Like, you know, there are some comeuppance coming, but people are scared, I think, to enter that space, because if you say sort of the wrong, like you were saying before, I think about Jimmy Fallon had a guest on the show, and he kind of used the wrong word, and you know, who knows how that goes. And so it's a scary time to have those controversial opinions, and the risks. You know, I think that people are scared to enter that space sometimes, and so they just avoid it because they just don't really want to put themselves out there.
And then we get nowhere, right? We get nowhere in making progress in these conversations. The other thing I was going to say, though, is some of these things are tied to people's identities, right? Like, you think about climate, right? Science is clear. We know we don't need to debate anything about that. But some of the, you know, oil and gas sector, as we live in our province in Alberta, like, there are families and communities have had generations and generations of people tied to that sector, right? And it's a part of their identity. And now we're saying, well, your identity is hurting everybody, or you know, people are saying some really hard things to these people, right? And so now you're putting these people, their backs up against the wall, and what kind of reaction do you think you're going to get?
Well,
right?
And it's how, like, through oil and gas and the jobs that they have, that's how they currently feed their family. Like, you can't just discount this. Like, my family, like, my grandfather was an oil man, and, you know, he fed his family for years and years and years through it, you know. And I don't know, I have a long history in my family of people working in oil and gas, and I worked in oil and gas too, and I get it. And you can't just discount somebody because of, you know, because of the fact that they work in a sector that for years where we live has been the main economic driver. And it's not a switch. Like, it's not a, you know, okay, now we're going to transition, you know, to renewables. Like, it's a long-term process, and you can't just sort of write people off because they work in oil and gas. And on the other side, you can't just write somebody off because they are, you know, pro-renewable energy. I mean, it's a mix. It's tough, though, because when you enter spaces where you have those conversations, there's just a lot of passion from both sides. And I don't know, man, it's a weird time to be alive to have those conversations.
It's a lot of work too, as well, to talk to somebody who is passionate about something that's on the opposite side with you. It is a lot of work, and it requires you to put yourself in a spot that is uncomfortable, which it seems like increasingly we're not willing to do.
Yep.
But I don't know. I have a friend who we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things in terms of perspectives and ideas or whatever. but we have a relationship, right? We're friends, and so we can actually have a proper conversation about things, right? There's an investment into our relationship, which makes a big difference. But now people are just not willing to do that, right? It makes me sad a little bit.
There's a so this I think has started to change a little bit, where there are long form conversations between people on opposing ends of view. There's a great YouTube video with Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro, just like talking about everything. And I think it's like a 2-hour video where they just sit down, and they even say, I'm like, they disagree on so much. It's like Ben Shapiro is deeply religious, and Sam Harris wrote probably the most popular, not agnostic, what's the word when you don't believe in anything? Atheist book of our lifetime, certainly. And so but they can have a civil conversation around it and just kind of recognize that they're individuals with different opinions, and you know what, they're both right sometimes. And that's anyways, there's more of a space. There are pockets of the internet where people are having these respectful long form conversations around this stuff, and they do so much more eloquently than I'll ever highlight an issue or outline an issue. And that's really, really, I love seeing that, and I really like listening to those kinds of conversations. Or even like Russell Brand, and who do you do it with? Maybe Ben Shapiro too, actually. I can't, but like there are series of conversations between people with very conflicting views and ideologies, and they just have honest conversations, and they sort of respect each other, and they get heated sometimes, but they both sort of are able to sort of come back down and understand that this is this is the point. Like, I'm pointing out what I see as a flaw in your philosophy, or I'm pointing out some counter arguments to your thoughts, and shouldn't make you upset that somebody's pointing out counter arguments to how you believe. And if you can't defend your own viewpoint, then maybe it's time to start questioning your own viewpoint. And that's something that took me years to kind of learn, and to not, if somebody says something that's true to you and you get upset, whose fault is that, right? And I was the one that people would say something to me that had 100% truth in it, but I didn't like that it was true or something. And so I would get upset. And I would get, I was the person that was like yelling down at people, and just not healthy and not a cool way to converse. And who wants to hang out with that guy or have a conversation with that guy? The last 10 years or so, I really, really tried to sort of stop that and understand other perspectives. And I'm still terrible at it, but I really appreciate these long form conversations, because these are like experts in their field, and they can sit down and have respectful conversations with each other. And I really appreciate those types of things that are going on right now.
Did you find yourself cheering for one or the other?
No, not. I mean, I like Sam Harris. I've read some of his books. I like sort of how he presents his arguments. I like how much he's thought about things. I really appreciate his views on like meditation and all that stuff. And 8 years ago, I would have said that I hated Ben Shapiro probably. But the more I listened to both those guys talk, the more I realized that they're quite similar in a lot of ways, and they're both just really rooted in they have very strong rationale for why they believe what they believe, and they're happy to talk about that rationale, and they're happy to debate that rationale, but they have reasons for why they think what they think. Whether you agree with them or not, that's fine. But I don't know. And like Ben Shapiro's a smart dude, and he has a lot of interesting things to say, and he has some things I don't really agree with, but it doesn't mean I just get to write him off. And like Sam Harris has some things that I don't really agree with, but I'm just not going to write him off. And that's sort of, so this thing I read, and it has more to do with the polarization of political ideologies. And I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, so sorry, man. But like in 1990, we'll say, they polled left-leaning and right-leaning voters in the United States. So like this is one of the things that I do when I'm talking and I'm collecting my thoughts. I stumble over my words and I don't like it. The Democrats and the Republicans, and they had the top 10 most talked about issues of that time. And they said, okay, person who has voted Democrat your whole life, how many of these issues do you align with? Or, how many of these issues do you agree with? So whatever. So like anti-gun, pro-abortion, and pro-environment, let's say. So and then they would sort of compile that, and they'd say, okay, the average Democrat agrees with 3 out of 10 of these things. meaning that the average Democrat probably had a strong stance on the environment, but you could probably have but we're still sort of willing to be convinced on gun control. And it was the same on the right. They redid that recently, and it's something like 8 out of 10. So if you're a Democrat, you agree with whatever the top 8 of the 10 hot topics are the day, you agree with the Democratic position on that. So you're much more enshrined in sort of what the thought processes are with that political party. And what that means is there's less of a space to have a bit of a conversation. And you can sort of, it also sucks because as a Republican, you can say, I know what those Democrats think. Or as a Democrat, you can say, I know what those Republicans think. And you're probably right. And so it kind of allows you to just disregard that entire opinion. Like people are really, and like people are also a lot more tied and ingrained in their party as opposed to their positions on issues. Meaning that if some brand new issue popped up tomorrow, whatever it was, life on Mars.
Right.
And the Democrats said, no, there is no life. And the Republicans said, yes, there is life. There are people, and if I recall, it's the majority who would say, well, my party, who is the Democrat party, says there's no life on Mars, so there's no life on Mars. And you can't convince me otherwise. And the Republicans would say, well, my party believes that there is life on Mars. And so that's what I believe, and you can't convince me otherwise. So like they're much more, and there's also like a bit more of a negative hue too, where people sort of align their political positions. Like as a Democrat, I'm a Democrat because I hate those Republicans, not because I'm passionate about what my party does, and vice versa.
It's tribal culture.
Totally. So there's a bit more of a negative passion around it because you're aligning yourself with this group of people, not because, and to a certain degree because you believe in what they believe and like what their positions are, but you're heavily influenced by the fact that, yeah, like these people are cool, but I hate those people over there. It's a really weird thing. And I'd love to say that that's not the case in Canada because we're not a two-party system, but it's not. I mean, yes, there are more options, but really, you lean one way or the other, and there's a bunch of parties for you to lean one way or the other, and maybe they're a little bit different, but it's still not that different in Canada, I don't think.
No, I agree. I think it's not different at all. I think that makes sense. People don't have the time to read everything and research things and form informed opinions of certain topics. And so then who are they going to go to? They're going to go to their media of choice. They're going to go to their friends, their family, people who they trust, right? And so if they trust the Democratic Party, then they're going to just align with them, right? Now, then that requires there has to be some responsibility that some of these parties and politicians and media folks have to take, which is that they are people who inform the public on so many different things and help form their positions on things, and they should hold that privilege, or they should hold that space with a lot of privilege, right? And I'm not sure that probably happens, right? Yeah, it's. I read that too about climate change, and I'm reading a book called "Saving Us" by Katherine Hayhoe. It's fantastic, and she's. I don't know if you've heard about her. She's an atmospheric scientist out of Texas, and she's actually Canadian, but she moved to Texas, and she's a strong Christian, and she talks about sort of why her faith has made her, study what she studied and why she's pursued climate change. But she says there's clear data to show that at the end of the day, the thing that makes people move one way or the other is their political ideology and their leanings. And she kind of goes into that for a number of reasons, but one of those reasons is because people are looking for or tend to band with what they know as their source of truth when they don't know what is true and what is to believe, especially in this day and age. We don't know what to believe at all. Like you said, you started this podcast with that. And so then you're going to go to your party.
Yeah, but, fair enough.
Yeah. What I was going to say though, talking about sort of this strong allegiance to one party or the other, I don't know if you've been following what's been happening in the States in November, but so earlier this year, the Democrats passed significant legislation or funding to support people who, are having trouble going through COVID. So major monthly payments, kind of similar to our CERB, Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. And so that was a success. It was, I think, 1 point something trillion. It might be more than that. It was a significant amount of money. But the bigger prize, or something that was supposed to follow, was Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan.
Okay.
Which is essentially to make inroads in a number of areas. This is like progressives like wish list, right? So obviously action on climate change and action on social justice and a number of different things that are super important to progressives. And so I believe it passed the House, and then it goes to the Senate. And so I'm not sure if you're aware, but the United States Senate right now is a 50-50 split. And if you remember from 2020 how excited Democrats were to pick up those 2 extra seats so that they can have that 50-50 split, well, the senator from Virginia, Joe Manchin, essentially blocked the bill, and so it didn't allow it to go through. And this would have been, $2 to $3 trillion. I know I'm putting a range on that and talking about trillions, but it was a significant amount of money that would have made a difference for sure in a number of areas. And it just makes me think that progressives, seems like they can never get their act together in terms of moving things along. There's always like this, on one side, there's this like extreme of like, it has to be perfect. It has to be the silver bullet. And then on the other side, it's like, well, it's too far. You're too far gone, so I'm not willing to talk to you. But like you have this moment right now, and the midterm elections in the United States are this year. You have this moment right now where in 2020, so many progressives, so many people were excited to just move on. You got these 2 extra senators. And yes, some things were passed. It's not like it's been a dud of the first 2 years for Joe Biden. Some things have gotten passed. But you have this moment to make some historic programming and legislation, and you can't get it done. And it's like if conservatives and Republicans had that chance, 100% they would band together and figure that shit out. Like it's just,
really?
Yeah, oh, no question. I think part of it is that, conservatives, by definition and principle, when change happens, there's a lot to lose, right? You're conservative for a reason. And so you're going to make sure that you get involved. You're going to make sure that you hold on to whatever you have, right? There's a lot more incentive. Whereas progressives, you're always chasing this thing that's not really defined very well, I think. And so it's just, it boggles my mind. We've seen this in Canada too, in several provinces where, progressives could not band together in a strategic way, and then all of a sudden the next election you see people frustrated, and then they vote in a conservative government, right? And so it's the same thing. I really question the 2022 midterms, whether same thing with Obama. I mean, whether this thing goes to the Republicans and you see a shift in power, and then what? Then you're going to be like, oh, we had those 2 years to get something done and we couldn't, right? It's just, I think there's just a lot. It just frustrates me whenever I see, and maybe there's still a chance they're saying Joe Manchin maybe did this on purpose because now he has kind of control of things, so he can really say what he really wants, and there's still an opportunity to do this bill, and so maybe there's a possibility of doing that. But if it doesn't happen, I don't know. There's a limited window here because the midterms are coming up, so you only have a certain amount of time to get this done. And if they can't get this done, we're talking about significant things that will benefit so many people in their lives, and you can't rally around to just get this thing done.
Bummer, dude. That man, what a name, Joe Manchin.
Yeah, he's he is holding a significant amount of power for sure. He's.
Do you think he's like sort of? And I don't know anything about this stuff. Do you think he's that's? Like you sort of mentioned the fact that maybe he did it now because he has all this sway and power, and everybody's talking about Joe Manchin, and politically, that's probably politics in some ways is a popularity contest, and so if people know you, that's not a bad thing. You ever watch Veep?
Oh yeah, I haven't watched all the seasons, but definitely have watched it. Yeah.
Man, that show, if that's any reflection of reality, just like I don't know, man. and I'm not saying it is. I don't know anything about that stuff, but. If even a fraction of that is true, and like how people are sort of recruited to vote one way or another on a certain bill or whatever it is, it's
well, Joe Manchin's from so Virginia is typically a Republican state. Like Trump won that in 2020 by 16 percentage points, like significant. And so I think Joe Manchin's opposition to the progressive part of his party is a real big seller for a lot of the voters in Virginia, because it's like, okay, he's somebody who's, he's sticking to us. He's holding down Virginian values, right? And
Sure.
and
So maybe he did it to be true to his voters.
oh, for sure. Oh, 100%. I mean, all these things are political for sure, but it's just when you have this massive opportunity to make a significant amount of change. Obama's book that I read, he talks about was it the climate legislation, or was it Obamacare? But anyways, probably Obamacare. He was able to convince some Congress people to sacrifice their political career, and in the midterms they lost their careers, but it was because they voted for Obamacare, right? Transformational stuff, right? For at least for that country. I don't know. You're talking about $2 to $3 trillion. Like, that is huge.
It's big money.
Yeah.
Like, what's the GDP of the United States right now?
I think 14 trillion.
So that's a fat chunk of change.
It's a lot of money, and I mean, the concern is about borrowing, and it's like, okay, now you're concerned about borrowing. Like, all this time, your debt. If you look at the U.S. debt clock, that you find that online, like, it's just enormous, and now you're concerned about debt. It's always that question. It's like debt. But I mean, I'm sure there's, out of $2 to $3 trillion, you're going to have some things that are falling through the cracks and are probably not properly planned or thought through. Mm-hmm. But there was significant climate stuff in there, right? I mean, it wasn't the perfect bill. Originally they were talking about doing a clean electricity standard, which would have made a significant amount of difference. It obviously would have taken coal power off the grid in the United States, but Joe Manchin's from a coal power state, right? So then they shifted to incentives and putting a lot of money, throwing money at the problem. And so there's a lot of subsidies and incentives and things like that were a part of this bill, as opposed to like that kind of legislation, but it still didn't go through. So.
Oh man, crazy. Yeah, sorry I can't offer up any, pithy retorts to any of that. I just don't know anything about American politics. I haven't been following.
No, it was just something I wanted to bring up, because I'm like, am I thinking about this the wrong way? Like, it just seems that every time progressives, whether it be in this country or anywhere, when they have the opportunity, there's this year of like, okay, we're gonna do something, and then all of a sudden the knives come out and people are like, oh no, this is not progressive enough, or you're going too far, rather than just looking at like, it's a constant progress. You're not going to make change overnight, right? Like, it's a big ship that the United States has to move. Like, you can't. No,
there's a video on YouTube. There's a guy, what's his name? John, I can't remember. He just did like a joint. So he has his own YouTube channel, which is worth watching on its own. Very interesting guy. He's not very old. I doubt he might be in his 30s. He just covers topics that are generally interesting. And his YouTube channel has now kind of sort of gained some momentum, but he just paired up with the New York Times, and they put together a video that's speaking to basically exactly what you're talking about. It's titled something that's a little clickbaity. It's like liberal hypocrisy has stalled all democratic policies or something like that. But you should look it up, because I didn't know much about it, and I had watched it, and it's pretty interesting. And he's pretty good at sort of communicating complex sort of histories and problems and theories or whatever. And the heck's his name? John something. But yeah, just look up John, New York Times, liberal hypocrisy, and I'm sure it'll pop up. But he talks about that exactly. And I think he even mentions like the ability of sort of the Democrats to find ways to not be as cohesive as they need to, whereas the other side has always been a bit of a more cohesive unit. So I don't think you're off base based on one YouTube video I watched. So I mean, what more do you need, right?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask you about, so Elon Musk was doing a podcast or something recently, and he was asked about people criticizing his wealth, right? And particularly, there are some Democratic senators, Elizabeth Warren in particular, maybe Bernie Sanders, who have said, I think Elizabeth Warren even called Elon Musk a freeloader, and said, he's not paying his taxes and all this kind of stuff, richest man in the world or second richest man in the world, whatever, and he's not paying any taxes. And so he talks about this, and he said, well, it's not like I'm sitting on a big pile of cash. Like, all my wealth essentially is tied up with two companies, Tesla and SpaceX. Tesla as stock, and he's like, I own 20% of the company, so shareholders determine the value of that company, and right now they're valuing it at $1 trillion. So yeah, my wealth is that much, 20% of that, essentially. And then SpaceX, he's like, it's a private company, but my wealth is tied up in that as well. It's not like I just have all this cash. And I started to think about whether that made sense to me, and I think it does, because it's like you're discounting I think SpaceX, maybe from my point of view, is a little bit more controversial than Tesla, just because you can argue the amount of satellites they're putting up there. Like, is that a good thing? The amount of like
cars floating in space.
Yeah, and emissions that come out of these things, and I've read an article about how the launch sites, like it really destroys the surrounding land around those areas, and all kinds of stuff. So I think SpaceX may be a little bit more controversial, but still, like, NASA is not doing anything, and SpaceX stepped in and is now pretty much the main firm or company that is doing NASA's business, right? Clearly they're adding value in some way, shape, or form. And obviously Tesla is adding a ton of value and has advanced EVs beyond anyone's imagination in the short amount of time that they've involved. Yeah. And so he put his, we may have talked about this, but if you've ever heard about his story, like when he did PayPal and he had $1 billion and he risked that for SpaceX, and it was like down to the last launch, and if it didn't work, he would have lost that $1 billion essentially. And he was willing to do that because for him it was about solving some important problem and achieving something of great value, right? Like, so to get that kind of criticism, and he says he doesn't have any offshore bank accounts, and like I'm sure people have looked into this. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I don't know. I don't have a problem with it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's a problem that, and he recently also sold some of his Tesla stock because he was criticizing, like, hey, people were like, hey, you should sell your Tesla stock and then put that money towards like ending world hunger or something. And he's like, well, if there was an actual feasible way to do that, I would do that, right? Mm-hmm. And then the UN, I think, got involved and they're like, no, there are programs here. You could totally help out. And so he's sold some of his Tesla stock as a result of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, but
so
anyway.
Yeah, so I don't know enough about U.S. tax law to have an opinion worth listening to on this. I will say that if he is not breaking any laws, if he's paying the taxes that are owed to the United States based on his income, and sure, there's ways around it, I imagine. And again, I don't really know enough about that stuff to be worth listening to. If he's not breaking any laws, anybody can prove, and he's sort of paying the taxes that are owed based on whatever the IRS says. I don't really have a problem with it. I think that it's difficult. It's almost like two separate conversations, right? Like, you can't just say, wow, this guy doesn't need to pay taxes because he's doing all these wonderful things for humanity. Where we're like, Jeff Bezos is doing not awesome. I mean, whatever. His company is probably much less socially impactful in a positive way than, say, Tesla or SpaceX will be. Who knows what history's opinion will be of these companies 200 years from now? But I would imagine that Musk's companies will have a greater positive impact than Bezos's companies. But as long as they're both paying the taxes that they are owed, and as far as the IRS can tell, they're not breaking any laws, then I guess it's fine. Yeah, sorry, not that interesting of a
no, it was more of a principle question, right? Like whether two people, I mean, I don't know about Bezos's wealth, but I think a lot of it is also tied up in Amazon. But people who have created things that have, I mean, we can't deny Amazon has added value to society. Maybe it's now like, things are a little bit much, but at the same time, like, we talked to Joelle and she talked about how they've enabled authors and all these things. That was very positive. And you think about this pandemic, how many things have people, like, could we have functioned in terms of getting our goods and services if it weren't for companies like Amazon? Right? Probably, Amazon really is pushing the bar from a supply chain perspective. They have really driven innovation. They have pushed all these other companies to rethink how they do business. Like, those are positive value add to society. Now, I mean, we can spend a whole podcast talking about the negative aspects of Amazon and Amazon Web Services and whatever. But nevertheless, let's just say that, like you said, they're not doing something wrong. In principle, the first and second richest people on the planet, if they're not paying much in taxes because their wealth is tied up in their stocks, is that a problem?
Oh man.
Forget about the company. Forget about
Yeah.
whether the company adds value or not.
I mean, I have stocks. I don't pay taxes on them. I don't know those companies though. So I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. I think I'm okay with it. I don't know enough about it to like have a strong stance that I could like back up with any kind of rationale, because I just don't know. You know, from how you presented it to me, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a problem. But
And I'm sure I'm missing something. Like, absolutely,
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm missing something, right?
I mean, but you know, like what's the breakdown? I don't know. What's the breakdown of? Are they paying? Like they could afford to pay more taxes, probably more so than people who have less money. But if they're using legal mechanisms to pay the least amount of tax possible, and those loopholes are still available.
Mm-hmm.
If it's legal, if it's all legal, which again I don't know if it is, maybe there's some sort of shady dealings, but if it's legal, if they're not laundering money or however people sort of get out of paying taxes, I don't take issue with it. Now we could debate whether the laws are
ethical,
are ethical or not, but I don't think you can conflate. I think to a degree, if somebody's making their money illegally, obviously this is different. But I don't think that you can say it's okay for this guy because his company has a strong social benefit, and it's not okay for this guy because his company doesn't. It's just, here's the law. The law is the law. If you make money legally, here's what you have to do with it as far as the tax perspective goes, and that's sort of it. And so I don't. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to pay more taxes than I do, right? And if I had $1 billion, I doubt I would just. I doubt that would change in me, and you could you could take in sort of the charitable donations and sort of how they're impacting society in a positive way into consideration, which I think when you file your taxes you do, at least in Canada you do, right? Like, so I don't know, I don't so I don't know enough about it to have a hot take on it. If they're following law and like not breaking it, I think I'm okay with it. I would be fine if people that made a bit more money paid a bit more taxes than those who didn't. But I don't know enough about tax law to really have any kind of hot takes on this one. But so like you sound like you're just it's good though, right? Like you're fine with what's going on.
I think based on sort of what you're also saying, like as long as they're not, which I am sure that obviously there are people who are taking advantage of tax loopholes and all these kind of things. So if those things were corrected and everything was peachy from a tax code perspective, and people can't avoid things and they don't have any sort of offshore bank accounts, I'm okay with creators being rewarded. Like, I think that they took the risk. And I'm just speaking about Elon Musk because I don't know Jeff Bezos' story. But what I've read about Elon Musk in this story is that he took the risk, and obviously there were a lot of people at Tesla in the beginning he worked with and all that kind of stuff. But these entrepreneurs are taking risks, and they should be rewarded for it. Not everybody is doing that, right?
Yeah, and like even Musk, I don't know the details, but he's like, I started this company, failed. This company failed. Third company I started, failed. Fourth company started. Fifth was PayPal. And so he he got the shit kicked out of him from an entrepreneurial perspective 4 times. I'm sure that PayPal was his 5th company, right?
Right.
But so 4 times he tried something and failed, and he kept going. And then he did PayPal, and then he did SpaceX, and then Tesla. So he sort of I don't know that if I put my life savings, and I don't know if he did or not for those first 4 companies, but if I can lost all my money
quits
2 times in separate ventures and it didn't go well, I don't know that I would try a 3rd time, definitely not a 4th time, and definitely not a 5th time. Like, you really have to have a certain it's just sort of how you're wired. You have to be so resilient to do that stuff, and he was resilient, and now he's the richest guy on earth. And so so I don't know,
but if Tesla, so like he said, like if Tesla tanks, I go down with the company. Like, he's like, that's my mentality. He's like, I'm not all of a sudden selling Tesla stock to make some money and then rebuying those shares or anything like that. Again, taking his word at it. I don't know what the actual truth is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this is somebody who believes in his company, and he you know, he should be rewarded for the success of that company. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's ways. I think the challenge is that people, it's just a perception thing, right? Is that the richest two people on the planet may not be paying that many taxes compared to Joe Schmo, right?
Yeah.
There's that whole, Obama said this about Buffett, that Buffett's secretary pays more taxes than Warren Buffett does, right? Like,
is that true?
I don't know, but I mean, he said that line, and I'm sure there's some truth to that,
Yeah.
right? And Buffett has acknowledged, like, that's, proportionally people who are rich like him need to be paying more in taxes. Anyway, just was curious about your thoughts on that. What I also wanted to talk about, though, is when you're talking about space, have you heard about this James Webb telescope?
Just peripheral. I overheard a conversation.
Fascinating.
So give me the background here, and we'll.
$20 billion telescope.
Got it.
It's essentially, I don't know if it's putting Hubble out of commission, but essentially is going to be the telescope now.
Okay.
And James Webb, I guess he was the NASA administrator during like the Apollo missions, like during the 60s. So I guess well-known name. I didn't know. I did find that out.
Okay.
And so $20 billion, they're hoping this telescope can give insights into the origins of the Big Bang.
Cool.
Yeah,
Very
just
cool.
and just incredible. They said they had to fold it into the spacecraft, and then once it gets launched, it has to then in space like unfold itself and then set itself. Like, it's just beyond me, you know, how they do these things.
Super cool. So I'm all. That's very interesting stuff. I'd be very curious to see sort of what they kind of find out, and Big Bang theory. Any more information on that would be pretty sweet. Space is so interesting and so boring at the same time. Like, it's so, like, there's so much potential, right? Like, there's so much potential out there for space. So many interesting things. If there is other life, which there probably is, so cool. And now, like, the New York Times has like released videos of like unidentified flying objects that have now been declassified, and all that stuff. That's all interesting stuff too. But I don't know. It's just. I find like when a new what just went to Mars. There was like a little robot that went to Mars, and it's just boring. It's just like red dirt, and cool, right? Like it's there, and that's fun. But
it's the journey that makes it so amazing, right?
The journey is insane. The fact that they can even put a man into space and women into space and like put them on planets and like. That's insane. That's just so crazy. But they never find anything that cool. I have this debate with like some friends of mine all the time.
You're going to get a whole bunch of hate, man, on this one.
Probably. And like Chris Hadfield is now not going to come on our show. Not that he ever was before, but like Chris, like, make space interesting to me. And it's, to be fair, I had a telescope when I was a kid. Like, I used to look at the moon. It's awesome. There's a lot of cool stuff. But I have this debate with my friends of like the ocean versus space. Like, what's more interesting right now? The ocean. I'm 100% team ocean because there's so many interesting things going on in the ocean.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so like if somebody was like, hey, you need to dedicate your life to, or like read 2 books on the ocean or 2 books on space, I'm like, ocean, like this. And if it's like nonfiction, because there's so many cool things in the ocean. Like, have you watched the documentary My Octopus Teacher?
No.
Oh man, you should watch it. It's super cool. This guy in like South Africa just like dives this sort of little coastal kelp forest every day for not quite a year, and he makes this relation, and he like forms this relationship with this octopus, and the stuff that this octopus does is insane. It's so cool, really, really cool. And just like, that's pretty interesting. Have you heard that killer whales are now actively hunting great white sharks off the coast of Africa?
I think I saw a video clip on this.
There are great white sharks washing up on the shores. They're dead, and only their one organ is gone. So like these killer whales know how to kill a shark and like the best part of the shark to eat. How cool is that? That's so cool. So like they're the apex predator now in the ocean. Probably, I don't know, but that's cool. Have you ever heard like the blue-ringed octopus?
No.
Check out this blue-ringed octopus. It's like this little octopus. It's like orange. It has little blue rings on it, and it's lethal. It like has like a little toxin in it that like you don't feel it, but it'll like puncture your skin, and it puts a toxin in you, and you slowly go paralyzed. You slowly become paralyzed and you die. It's like this cute little octopus that like changes. It's like kind of like flashy blue and orange. It's super cool. It's just a little blue-ringed octopus.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think the ocean is obviously, we don't know enough about our oceans. We don't know about the internal core about our Earth. Like, we do a lot more exploration, it seems like, outside of our Earth than we do on Earth in that regard. I think the thing that's cool for me about space is that it just goes beyond one's mental capacity and imagination.
Totally.
Like, I was reading today about, I'm sure you've seen these videos of how, the Earth, like they show the Earth and then these next planet, and the next planet you see the Earth get smaller and smaller, and then when it's compared to the sun, it's so tiny, and then the sun compared to the next star or whatever. I was reading this article about how they were able to detect this mega, I don't know if it was a Death Star, but essentially when a star is now done, it releases a ton of energy. And so they said they were able to either capture or detect this flare of energy that emitted 1 billion times more energy than our sun in 1/10 of a second. Like, I don't even know how to put that together. I don't even know what that means.
No, you can't.
To me, that, like, it's just, that's the cool part for me, is that it just goes beyond your imagination. Even like simple enough, you think about our solar system, that we have these marbles just in this 3-dimensional space, and they just happen to move around each other. And we're just on terra firma here, and we don't know what that looks like. Like, to be able to go to space and then see that blue marble or any of these other planets, like, again, I think it's just it just boggles my mind so much more than I think the ocean is so cool. And I think there's obviously like the midnight zone and the dark parts of the ocean. We don't know much about it. There's so many crazy species down there that we have no idea exist. Fascinating, but I think it's like so much more tangible, and I think that's cool in itself. But then, like, the fact that so much of space is not tangible, it just, for me, takes it to another level.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think the fact that it's not tangible is what sort of makes
that detracts you a little bit.
Totally, yeah, because it's just okay, so there's this star that blows up and it's a billion times greater than the sun.
Right.
So it's like so far away. Like, I'm never gonna feel its heat, or like, that's a lot of energy. Like, we're all gonna die one day. Like, there's gonna, the sun will explode, and like, that'll be it, or whatever it is that does it. Like, our planet is, eventually gonna just be wiped up, I'm sure. But it's just because it's unfathomable, because our brain just doesn't sort of comprehend what that means. I don't know. Maybe I'm too stupid to sort of realize the like potential of it or something. But until there's like, life in outer space, or I don't know. You ever seen the movie Event Horizon? There's just like this ship. It's like a ghost ship. It's like a ship that's like floating in space. It's just like full of dead people. And like they send people like until we find like an Event Horizon from a different planet millions of light years away that's just like floating, but like there's nothing in it. We go in and it's doing weird stuff. Till that happens.
Then space becomes cool.
Yeah, then space cooler than the ocean immediately, right? Like, that's the thing. It takes like one little thing, and it's just like, space is awesome. Space is the coolest. We just haven't had that thing yet. Although, why did those videos of UFOs or whatever they called them from the Air Force, from the U.S. Air Force, not garner more interest? Like, have you seen these things?
No, I've heard Joe Rogan talk about these things like endlessly with some of his guests.
I don't understand.
I haven't seen the videos. Yeah.
I don't understand why it's not bigger news. Like, they just basically admitted that here's these things that are flying in our airspace that we don't know why they move the way they do. We don't know how they move the way they do. Like, I think because it's like done in that sort of that whatever fighter jets use for the visual imaging. It's not like super clear 4K or whatever we use now, but still, it's like these objects, and the guy's like, "What is that?" I have no idea. And it's like moving back and forth super quick, and then it's just gone. Like, why are we not talking about that one? I can't believe that. Like, it's almost like that. Don't Look Up, where they're like, there's a meteor coming, and everybody's gonna die, and nobody took it seriously, and I don't know. I thought of that immediately when I saw a couple scenes in that Don't Look Up movie, because releasing interesting information here, and it's not, it's like death isn't imminent because of these images, but these are like groundbreaking stuff. And it's basically like the United States government admitting that there are strange things happening and we can't explain them. And here's a video of it. Everybody was like, "Oh, that's cool." Did the others win last night? I don't know. Interesting stuff.
I don't know. Maybe there's. I think I don't know. For me, it is interesting, but I wasn't captivated by it. I guess because maybe I needed like some authorities, some good authorities to really like weigh in on this, right? Like, and I've heard like Neil deGrasse, he was on Tyson or whatever, he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he talks about this, and he kind of makes some good scientific arguments about like, okay, what that could have been. Like, you could have glitch in the systems, you could have people's perception as a pilot. Like, I don't know if they're the most trustworthy people. Not to say that they haven't seen what they saw, but anyways, I mean, I think there's a number of arguments to be made. I don't doubt that there isn't life out there. Like, how could you, just the expanding universe in itself, like there's so much unexplored. How can we say that it'd be ignorant to say that there isn't anything out there, right? Yeah. But I don't know. I think it's, I don't know. I think it just needs a little bit more scientific consensus from. That's something actually I was going to ask you. Is that so? You're that guy that you told me more recently about, who you read his book. Is it Steve Pinker or Robert Pinker? Steven Pinker. Yeah. Did you hear him on Joe Rogan's show?
I watched a clip of his first appearance on that show, but it was like from a couple of years ago, I think.
So he did one about a month or two ago. Yeah, no, really, really interesting. Yeah. And they had a fascinating conversation. And I can totally understand why you're a fan of his. He sounds. Yeah,
I mean, I've only read one of his books. It's called Enlightenment Now, but it's just like, here's what everybody says is what's going on right now. Like this is the worst time to be alive for all these reasons, and here's like, it's patently false. Here's all the data to show that this is easily the greatest time to be alive. And it was just a really refreshing book, and he just backed. And I didn't check his data, but whatever. Like, why? But just really, and he's a good writer. And I found that book really interesting. So I've got one more of his on hold at the library, and I can't remember what it's called. But
well, he apparently just wrote a book recently. So
I think it's his new one. Yeah, but I can't remember. Okay. What it is. Yeah, no, he's an interesting dude for sure, and just smart guy, eloquent guy. He actually wrote like a writing guide, like a Sense and Style writing guide, which I tried to read and couldn't figure it out because I'm not an author. But yeah, no, he's an interesting guy. He's a guy worth paying attention to because he just like makes you feel good. And he apparently has a couple other books on like violence throughout history, and he has another book on. I'm gonna mess this up. Anyways, yeah, he's worth reading for sure.
So they were talking about conspiracy theories, right?
Oh.
And Joe Rogan was just, obviously talking about the UFO thing and some other ones, and Steven Pinker, he's like, I don't know. He's like, I'm sure there are some things that might make sense, but to think that that the broader society, or that a secret is so closed that only a few people know it, and to date not many, like no one has kind of exposed that, or no one there's no further agreement, like that the information is so tightly kept that not more people know about this, especially in this day and age. He's like, I just can't believe that, right? It just doesn't make any sense to me, like that only a certain amount of people can hold on to a certain secret or a conspiracy.
Yeah,
but I thought it was a neat point.
Totally. Like, you think about, I mean, for some of these things to be true, you would have to have the greatest information keeping, hiding body of all time. Like beyond anything that we could ever understand. Like, to be able to sort of house this information in a safe space, whatever that is, and to only disseminate to people that absolutely had to know, and none of those people ever leaked the information, either intentionally or accidentally. It's just, that takes a lot to believe. Like, think of all the times in history where information has been leaked inadvertently when it meant the most. Like, have you seen The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch? It's about World War... I'm going to mess this up now. But it's World War I, and I think the Brits...
It's the coding one?
Cracking the German
Okay,
code.
I haven't seen it, but I know about it, yeah.
And like that, according to the movie, and I'm no historian, like that played a major role in Germany losing the war, and it all happened because there was a couple little, like, I don't know. So I just think that you know, there have been a lot of things where the stakes have been incredibly high, and that information leaked for whatever reason, and you know, like governments and large bodies can't keep secrets forever, and so why would these, you know, whatever the body in question is, why would they be able to keep these secrets so locked up and tight? And also, like, what's the motive around it? I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never.
Yeah, no,
I don't think I've ever really been super convinced by, you know, rationale.
Is there any conspiracy theory, like mainstream one, that you maybe grew up with and you're like, that might sound like kind of real, or?
I don't think so. I can't even really think of like what are some popular ones? Like throw some my way and I'll tell you if they're true.
Well, the one that I've always wondered about was the JFK assassination.
Oh.
Like that's obviously a very popular one, and that one, you know, especially with that Kevin Costner movie.
Oh God, yeah, you can't.
JFK,
I mean,
like
I love that.
It's hard to argue, obviously, that video footage. But then I've read and watched videos about other people doing analysis on these things, and so you're kind of like, okay. But anyways, that one to me is interesting, and it's like the fact that everyone's asking this question, but nobody gives an answer to it properly. Or
I mean, that movie is very after. That was really my so that movie with JFK, right? It's called by Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone. Yeah.
That was the first exposure I ever really had to that conspiracy theory. And when it was over, I was like, it's fact. Like, this is it's clearly, like, why are people not in jail? Like, why is this even a question? And then I Googled it, and they're like, well, Oliver Stone took some pretty strong liberties in that movie and really painted one side of it. And whatever. But, man, it's pretty... I was convinced that it was true, right?
Me too.
But, like, that's Hollywood. Yeah, I don't really know where I land on that one. I always feel so bad for Jackie Onassis. Like, that video is heartbreaking when she's, like, trying to crawl over the back of the thing. And she, like, I don't know, man, fucking crazy. Yeah, I don't know. I sort of, like, when I was a kid, I liked to believe in, like, Ogopogo and, like, Bigfoot and, you know, Yetis or whatever, stuff like that. But I just don't, I don't think it could stay the secret for this long. You know what I mean? Like, especially today with drones and stuff.
And all our smartphones and everything. Yeah. Everyone's got a watch fly and everything, right?
Totally. Like, that's, yeah. I mean, I've been rewatching. So every Christmas over the break, I like to sort of rewatch, like, movies that I haven't seen in a while that I know I enjoyed. So last Christmas, I watched, like, all the Daniel Craig, James Bond movies. Loved them. I actually haven't seen the new one. I'm amped on it. But so this year, I've watched 2.5 of the first 3 Bourne movies. Which is so good. They're great. But I don't know if that story could happen today, because like they're all using like flip phones, and they're all like nobody has or if people like not everybody has a camera in their phone. If they are, they're not reliable, and so many things happen in public spaces that like it would be impossible for these people to hide. Anyway, so I just, you know, if Jason Bourne, you know, can't get away with this stuff, how can Bigfoot? Right? Ask yourself that.
We should probably end on that.
Yeah. By the way, those Bourne movies, great.
Amazing.
They hold up very, very strongly.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we covered a lot of topics on this one.
Yeah, it was a good conversation.
Yep.
We have, for folks listening to our show, we have some guests lined up over the next month and a bit, and hopefully we'll have some more lined up as well. And in the meantime, Kyle and I will come in every now and then and do a little bit another episode to Nobody's Talk. But Kyle, man, always a pleasure. Enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, man. Nice to touch base again, and happy to be chatting with you on a regular basis again.
Yep. All right, that's a wrap, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.